Second time, another 20-minute video today. Going back on another video. Now this is just a comedic relief in a monotone sarcasm to to what the person of interest would be in my ADHD. Um, but in the Madison, Wisconsin, the big city versus the small town of Black River Falls, big city sociology is the differences of the vocabulary and how I worded it. Now, I could word it with facial expressions. I could word it in a different way. Um, or I could speak it monotone and some sincerity that the person in interest to Daniel Radcliffe was Darren. Darren Yule had interest in Darren Radcliffe. No, I don't, Daniel Radcliffe. Darren Yule had interest in Daniel Radcliffe. Now, I don't know if that's a gay man thing to actually say Darren Yule had interest in Daniel Radcliffe. He could have had interest in Daniel Radcliffe, which then on the notes that I received in the mail from Darren Yule's representative attorney, his representative as an attorney, that Darren Yule had interest in Daniel Radcliffe. Now, he might not have had interest in the property. He might have had interest in Daniel Radcliffe, only choosing to go to find out whether or not he's an LGBTQ member, a transgender member, or a heterosexual. Now, the person of interest into Daniel Radcliffe then was Darren Yule. Darren Yule had interest in Daniel Radcliffe and his law services. Now, whatever that law would be, or whatever his services are, is the monotone side of sarcasm of calling him as an LGBTQ member, a heterosexual, or a transgender member, in which I would have no idea. But at the side of, the sense of humor, putting people on blast is the same thing that, while everybody's being nosy, I'm just going to the delegations of, I haven't killed anybody yet. I haven't done anything severe to you in some type of retaliation tactic of the communication to what everybody else is doing at the disgust of putting my deceased grandma's name on some food stamps, as I seem to be pissing people off making these videos. But as I consider it entertainment in a monotone sarcasm to the person of interest or in interest of Daniel Radcliffe, that was Darren Yule, that wasn't me. And the interest, the person who had interest in the property, farming to two men, a heterosexual man named Owen Yule and an LGBTQ member named Darren Yule, the person of interest of obtaining the property with the state then was Daniel Radcliffe and Dan Dean, putting the judgment onto me, because if I fall out on paying the judgment, then two men that had interested in two other men would then be Dan Dean and Daniel Radcliffe, meaning they either had interest of the men on the property or interest of the property. Now, if they're heterosexual, farming two men that are weaker than the other side of society at the defamations and prosecution of a judgment towards why I would have to pay for everybody's debt, and I have to pay Dan Dean's bills, he gets paid. I have to pay Daniel Radcliffe's bills, he gets paid, and then I have to pay for the judgment, in which I pay the bank plus interest, which I have no interest in paying, in being a person in interest of not wanting to pay any interest. And it's interesting. So as I investigate this with interest, that's non-fiscal interest, that I had no interest in any of those men, Daniel Radcliffe, or Dan Dean. I don't have interest in the men. I'm a heterosexual, and that's just what you guys have interest in, watching your phone screens through the American peephole, looking at the peephole, looking at me, at the American people. And I, myself, is one of those American people being looked at through the American people as an American person with an intellectual behavior that's discussing vocabulary that would be considered some type of Jack Sparrow acclamation of why I would want to commandeer the ship, as if Aaliyah would want to rock the boat. Rock the boat. Rock the boat. And so, as I'm making sure all 3 to 10 of you men I'm fighting with, Matt Coran and Dan Dean and Daniel Radcliffe and Darren Yule, of those in interest, I'm just asking you not to have interest in my daughter as a pedophilia perversion to those who hacked my computer here in town, watching me and Samantha cry together, or whatever it was, of where my interest was. At that time, I had shed tears saying I had interest in Samantha, who wasn't ready yet, who no longer had interest. But we're not going to pay any interest to this, minding our business, of why I have to pay interest on this fucking judgment. And I'm not very interested in paying this interest, which means I should have to go after bankruptcy or go after the appeal, so that way I don't have any interest paying the interest for not having any interest in wanting to pay the judgment back. Some type of fraudulent behavior, as if I've been in contempt of not paying my child support, to why adding more interest on top of my child support would make me liable as a liability to not have any interest in paying any of this back. But as a man, as a laborer, a part of the system, I just wanted everybody to know that it's the interest payment that's easier to pay for in the fiscal side of this obligation of a judgment of my character, my persona, my personality, in interest, to pay the interest, a fiscal payment that I have the interest in, that I rather have interest in the money to go have a job here in the town of Black River Falls because I'm interested in having a job, to have the interest in understanding vocabulary words like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, anti-disestablishmentarianism, judgment, child support, very fancy fiscal words that I do not have interest in Tom Cooper, Dan Dean, Matt Coran, Daniel Radcliffe, because I'm not an LGBTQ member. And I just wanted to get this off my chest in case you had interest, but it's just not the interest in the payments that you should be creating interest for. And I hope this deters people from having interest. So as I start to pay the interest payments on the judgment, solely based on an LGBTQ member getting away with not paying interest on his mom's uh, perpetual debt, which is acclimated due to a mental illness, not understanding how to flip money, to always acclimate interest on top of interest, which is, creating inflation with more inflation. And if I don't have a job, I'll never be able to deflate the inflation. And as Ron Paul once said, you cannot defeat inflation with more inflation. Therefore, I hope you guys sell my truck pretty soon in the court case for the child support, because I have interest in making sure my truck gets sold to pay the interest and the arrears on my child support, as I have interest that I get my unemployment that I've never collected in my life that should be there to pay off the child support and the judgment for those at the courthouse who are in interest of me paying off that interest on the judgment and the arrears to the child support. Because you're in interest, I keep getting letters from you proving you're interested in me giving you my money. So since you're interested, I just figured I would have interest in telling you what I have answers to for the reasons why you keep sending me letters of why you have interest in my money. And in my sarcastic monotone, I hope this helps you guys decide which men have interest in what men and what their laws are of their services, of what you're interested in, of why I'm not interested in those services, which is why I'm trying to pay them off. So if you can help me get my unemployment to pay off the interest of the arrears and the judgment interest plus the judgment that has acclimating interest to it, I would be interested to see what you guys do on the federal side to assist yourselves into the money I saved up on my unemployment for this very moment of having a disabled mom, to pay off any interest and any perpetual debt that my mom may have acclimated during her process and her sanity breach of schizophrenia that would perpetually put her into debt, creating inflation with more inflation that I added, not having a job in that process, being a caretaker that's documented before we proceed in interest into this defamations lawsuit I'll be heading into with the state of Wisconsin, because there's people that have interest and why I'm being defamed and why there's a deceased woman of 2 years on my food stamps on my Quest app in my thing. She's been deceased for 2 years, and I don't think my grandma has interest as a dead woman being an interest of food stamps because she's deceased. So you're going to have to prove to me why she had interest in collecting food stamps after she's been deceased for 2 years. I'm seeing a lot of defamations, a lot of police brutality, deep state brutality, and I'm not in interest of that type of interest. I cannot defeat that inflation. And I'm just wondering where the mental illnesses lie of the defamations of what injecting mom with Haldol would be at these similar interests, what defamations is, and providing what depression would be to those like Lynn Hunstra in interest, trying to decide when she's interested in what my depression would be as she becomes a better psychiatrist or psychologist of why she's interested in taking on that career. And I'm a person of interest to discuss this with you because I'm interested in letting you know on why I'm not suicidal. It's just a discussion in vocabulary of what suicide is. And discussing it prevents the suicide itself versus, versus letting it bottle up inside me for those of you who have interest. And again, the fiscal interest I don't want to pay for. I can't defeat the inflation when I don't have a job, which creates more inflation, more interest. If I could get my unemployment, it would pay off the arrears, child support, and the judgment and the interest on the judgment, which I think your state, Lynn Hunstra, Dan Dean, Daniel Radcliffe, Tom Cooper, Matt Coran have interest in. That way you guys get your paychecks just like I want to get mine. And the only way I can get that from is your side, because that's where the unemployment sits, is the government side. And if I can't get that, having interest and getting my unemployment to pay off the interest, which is a different type of interest if you're interested to know, then I hope you have interest in discussing with us, with me publicly. If not, we'll discuss it in the courtroom at the defamations lawsuit, police brutality, racketeering, and child trafficking charges. I thank you very much.